Hey everybody, welcome to BrickVault. Today we are showing you the Fletcher class destroyer. This original design came from my brother Charlie, and the building instructions can be found at our web store www.brickvault.toys. With each purchase comes the PDF step-by-step building guide, as well as a digital parts list that can be uploaded quickly and easily online, and buying instructions is a great way to help support what we do here at the channel, and you can click that link in the description below to visit the Fletcher class destroyer custom build. Now, the inspiration for this build actually comes from playing a computer game called World of Warships, in which the Fletcher is commonly used either in its standard form or one of the many modified variations of the ship. The Fletcher class destroyer is often referred to as the workhorse of the United States Navy during World War II. The US Navy commissioned 175 of these ships between 1942 and 1944, which is more than any other destroyer class, but it has been used in many different navies around the world. The overall design was regarded as highly successful, with an armament of 5-inch guns and 10 torpedoes in quintuple centerline mounts for easy firing from either side of the ship. There are several of these destroyers preserved for public viewing today, one of which is the Sullivan's with the designation DD-537. Because many of these destroyers were made with often slightly different armaments, it was a little challenging finding one with the exact identical layout as our model, and the Sullivan's, depending on what period you view the ship, had an identical complement of weapon mounts. Now, focusing on the Lego model, it's built at a 1 to 200th scale, so the length of the ship measures to nearly 23 inches long, 58 centimeters, just under 7 inches high, 17 centimeters, and 2.5 inches wide, or 6 centimeters. For displaying purposes, which is what this model is primarily designed for, the ocean layout is 25 inches long, 5 inches wide, and on the golden stand, the model is just over 8 inches high. This means the Fletcher destroyer Lego model leaves somewhat of a similar footprint to other model ships, and you may have just seen me blow past that detail, but yes, this can be built in two different variations. The first one shows the destroyer in the ocean propelling through the water, while the second configuration shows the destroyer's full body with the complete hull exposed. We figured that those who would want to make a model would appreciate having the option, and most likely just want to build one version, so the parts lists included with this build are split up so you can choose between one version or the other, or you can add an alternate display option later down the line if you change your mind without needing to create your own new wanted lists. Now, taking a closer look at the model, the Fletcher destroyer has a relatively low profile. The hull hangs pretty close to the waterline, maybe only 2 full body lengths between the railing and the waterline when looking at the back or middle part of the ship. But as you move towards the front, there is this gradual curve that brings the nose much higher. That slowly sloping angle is achieved by adding an interesting little bend to the ship with several layers of plates connecting back and forth with a couple little round studs added in the center, and this gives it a little bit of wiggle room. The plates aren't too forgiving if you really wanted to curve the deck sharply, but fortunately this angle is pretty subtle and you don't feel much, if any, extra strain on the connections when putting it together. Now, at this scale, that curve makes all the difference here. The deck would have had to either raise up in the front in a much more rigid, or for lack of a better term, pixelated way, and if not, you'd have to sacrifice the extra height in the front altogether, which is something you may be able to get away with at a much smaller scale, but not here. Now, that slow curve design feature basically makes it for the rest of the model. The outermost edge of the destroyer hull is attached to this curve, which makes the tapering of the hull feel a bit more fluid in the front, and the flexi tube curves both inward towards the tip as well as upward from the middle. And because the baseline proportions of the ship are taken care of so smoothly here, it really allows your eyes to focus on all the fun details on the top without much other distractions. So moving on to what I think are the most fun parts for sure, the 5-inch guns are headed with flat silver flathead screwdrivers, and those curved wedges with the stud notches also really sells the shape of those guns. They are totally posable, both side to side and up and down, and then moving just a little bit further back, those anti-air guns, the smaller ones, are made up of a syringe piece, open stud, and a neck bracket. With the life rafts being just below, they are made of lifeguard floats for minifigs. And a quick note here, the orange looks better in my opinion, but we changed them to red because that color is much more plentiful on brick markets. So that's just a quick side note, but the larger service boats are surfboard pieces right next to them. And personally, I'm a big fan of how those panel pieces were used to to show off the guard railing for the upper walkways. Now jumping further back, you get a look at the 2 quintuple torpedo tube mounts, also posable with a bar clip in the center, and there's a couple of mounted lights using wrenches as the base. There's a small American flag with just an indication of the stars and bars, and just beyond there we've got some more 5-inch guns, some anti-air as well, also built with little wrench pieces, and in the very back there's a relatively simple build that makes up the ready-to-drop depth charges. Now that was just kind of a baseline highlight reel of some of the details that I found maybe the most fun for me, but there's no point in going through every single little detail that you can find, but there's a lot of interesting little accuracies that have been added in just about anywhere that you can find on the ship. Now also I think it's worth noting, if the 50 cals didn't give you a sense of scale, those ingots, those gray ingot pieces on the sidewalls are meant to indicate doors. That's a slightly upscaled height there, but I think the exact height probably rested right between like 1.5 studs, and I think it made sense to raise it up by a plate or so you could have ingot detailing, headlights with sunken in tiles on the sidewalls, as well as a few other little details on the edges just to give a little bit more life to the creation. And alright, now it's time to move on to the handling section of this video. It's usually my favorite part. I get to show you guys uncut how this model works when you're actually moving it around, because these detail builds are not as strong as Lego sets, and they shouldn't be. Here is a model I would say is a pretty casual handle. The body is extremely strong. Anything that looks big and solid is big and solid, and anything that looks small and delicate is generally small and delicate. For the most part, if there's something that's attached by 1 or 2 studs only, we like to have builds where if you knock them off, they're going to be a really easy thing to put right back on. No complicated, weird rebuilds. And also, we strive to have our models built in a way where if you look at a big solid part of the model, it is actually big and solid, and you can handle that without it being secretly delicate and going to fall apart in kind of a strange way. So, all of that aside, taking the top half off of the bottom is pretty easy. It sticks on with, I don't know, maybe 7, 8, 10 stud points of connection, not really sure. And I want to point out that the top half of the boat is extremely solid. When you look at it from underneath, it's mostly just plates stacked against each other, which of course makes it very heavy, very strong, and there is no place for bowing on this. You can also slide it around on any flat, smooth surface. If you wanted to make a trans blue tiled ocean, you could just have this thing sliding across any point, and who knows, maybe that'll be helpful for those of you who try to have a larger diorama. This thing could definitely fit in there easily. And then looking at the second half, the bottom half of the ship, for the most part, everything hangs on pretty darn well. And then looking at it from a top-down view, most of the ship is pretty much built like a brick. The plates are stacked against each other. There's a few studs that stick out. I think I counted 11. And also here's just a slightly closer look at both the rudder and 2 propellers. It doesn't spin around. Neither of those propellers spins. But at the end of the day, this is a pretty static model that is primarily built for display. And now let's move on to the second display piece. This is just a bit of the ocean and the boat cutting through the water. It is built to, I think, 2 bricks high, including the tile pieces there at the top, and you can see the placement of several different jumper pieces, slightly less points of connection on the ocean compared to the body of the ship, but when you attach it, there's a lot of little studs that kind of show maybe a little bit of rippling water on either side of the boat. And once you have the body lined up, it actually works pretty well to guide the piece into place. And I slowly but surely try to press everything down at least a little bit, and then go back through and press the entire ship down to make sure all those studs are connecting properly. Once everything is in place, you will see that the ship connects pretty darn solid to the base. And when it's on there, you know, you can lean it from side to side if you want. I haven't turned it all the way over. I don't know if it would actually stay on, but just in terms of being able to pick this thing up and move it around relatively casually, not having to be too delicate, it more than serves its purpose. Now, if you couldn't tell based on how I've been showing the ship off for the majority of this video, I certainly have a personal preference on how I like to keep this thing displayed, and that is the top half of the ship being attached to the hull. It's just a personal preference of mine. The completed destroyer just looks really really cool, and hopefully you'll be able to notice that the process here is relatively easy. I do like to take my time, so I've sped up the footage a little bit, and most of the time spent honestly switching one half over to the other is just playing around with the gun placement and making sure those torpedo tubes are all lined up properly. Now, speaking of display, it makes sense to show off the destroyer in one of our display cases, because really this is, I think, where the design really shines quite well. You can see the hull from a slightly lower angle. It kind of gives this model a much more rounded look. And I have a feeling if you had this displayed in a room with not much Lego around, people wouldn't figure out it's made from Lego bricks until you get quite a bit closer to the model. Also, and I almost forgot, but I did make a couple of custom stickers that I added on here for the 537 designation of the Sullivans. Looking back through different pictures of the ship, earlier in its deployment, the 537 was painted much smaller, and then at some point during the war, or possibly later, the numbers got a lot larger, and that's what they look like nowadays. I decided to go with what the ship looked like in its original form, which is these smaller numbers. And if you guys want more info on what type of stickers we use or printers and stuff like that, you can check out our FAQ. Doing these types of videos is always really interesting for me because I end up doing some research and learn a lot about not just the model, but of course its point in history, its place in time, and I definitely like to know what you guys think about this creation. Remember, you can always check out our web store, www.brickvault.toys, link in the description below. What types of models would you like to see us make in the future? Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time at BrickVault.